Murali, I've changed. You know, when the talk, I sent you that script. I will do back and forth a little bit. I'm not going to follow that in the same sequence.
No, no, you can do however you want.
Okay, we're live now.
We are
Uh,
live now.
yes.
Yeah.
So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever part of the world you're in. My name is Vijay Menon. I'm the executive director with TIE Global. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to the Education SIGS event this evening, talking about the realities of reskilling. We have two of our very eminent and prominent charter members. Both of them have been, one of them is a TIE Global trustee as we speak, and the other one's been a past trustee. We have Mr. Tariq Khan, who's a TIE Global trustee, who's going to be the moderator for this session. And then we have Murli Bokkapatnam, chairman and CEO of Wolski Technologies, a former TIE Global trustee, and somebody who's been very passionate about the whole area of skilling in India and other parts of the world. So it's going to be a very, very engaging conversation talking about the realities of reskilling. Uh, as you know, we have TIE Global has 10 SIGs, and the Education SIG is one of the most active SIGs with over 150 members, charter members, and many, many such sessions every month. To introduce this session, I'm going to invite Mr. Sriram Iyer. Sriram is the CEO of Qubit AI Technologies, a deep learning startup, and he's also pursuing a doctorate in management. Sridham has been a co-chair of the TIE Education SIG, a very, very passionate espouser of the activities of the SIG, and he's put together a lot of these panels and events and done a great job of popularizing the SIG outside of TIE. So he's also worked with TCS, and you can see his bio on the screen right now. So Sriram, over to you to conduct the program for this evening, as in India it is.
Okay. Thank you, Vijay. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, all. I welcome you all again onto this session. And in this session, before we get started, I would just put in a brief request to you. That is, for the guidelines, I'll request you that, if you have any questions during the session, you can please use the tab of questions, or during the chat, you can send the questions that you may have. During the sessions, I'll just request you to please put yourself on the mute. And what you could also do is, like, if you're facing any kind of internet issues, please switch off your video so that you can always hear to the audio. And so as we go further, as Vijay has said you about this SIG, I'll add further more details about the SIG. The TIE Education SIG, the basic purpose, it has got two basic purposes. First is to empower each and every charter member, because we know that every charter member has a successful history, has done quite a lot. So we would bring in some seasoned charter members or industry leaders to come and empower them with the right set of knowledge, so that they are because they can stay tuned with what is happening in the industry, especially in the education sector. And this would also bring in the experts from overall the area, from the education, who have done education businesses. So we serve two purposes. First is to teach each and every charter member what they want to learn, and second, to provide education entrepreneurs support so that they can perform very well. This entire SIG is a brainchild of Tariq, as we know, and I would here like to introduce Tariq, the man behind the entire show. So Tariq is, as Vijay already introduced you, that he's on the board, one of the board member of TIE Global. He's a trustee there. He has been past president of TIE New York, and is a founder member of a venture capital called Living Capital. Very able mind, stayed all over the world, worked in different continents. Very has very persistent thinking, and a man of belief, and consistent in deliveries. So welcome, Tariq. The program and stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sriram. I just wish I could say, yeah, it is my brainchild. Education has to be the brainchild of everyone, and we're finding this out. Like, sure, I know about education, but all of us 30, 40 attendees today, there's no question, and we know that from the history of time. So yes, it would be nice if all we have done is just organized it. And organized it, it's a particular COVID has paradoxically had a huge impact on our global connectivity. before there was the excuse, okay, I'll travel, I'll meet you in Dubai, then I go to Singapore. No, none of that. Now we just say, okay, Zoom call, and it's just fantastic. I was talking to Vijay just at the beginning, and everybody's workload has increased because we're working for more and we're connecting much more. So within that context, we've got these special interest groups. So there's, fintech and healthcare and so on. So on this one, the idea was, where is education going and is it keeping up with what's happening in life? And we've brought a whole bunch of speakers. And apologies for the typo, cut and paste goes wild. And when I did this deck, I still have Shantanu Jha's name in here at the bottom. Today, we have Murali Bukkapatnam, and he is the man who is our guest today. As Sriram and Vijay were saying, Murali is a long-standing stalwart of TiE, been involved in many things. And today, the focus will be on Reskilling. It's a company that he has set up, and we will go into that. But I will start, I guess this is the intro, and Murali, as we speak, we will go into the intro, but welcome to the event today, Murali.
Thank you, Tariq. Appreciate it. Thank you, Sriram, and thank you, Vijay, for the lovely welcome from each one of you guys.
So let's get started. And I think this is where we can minimize the slide so we can see the names of the people or whatever. But from now on, I think we're just talking. So here, Murali, why don't we start with just a little bit of a personal background, like what were your quick words of background and formation or your early career interests? Just tell us how you got going.
Right. Thanks, Tariq. So I started my career, my first job ever was in US. So I used to work for a system integrator, working for United States Coast Guard. And that's where I got my career started. And then in 2000, I became an entrepreneur, started my IT services company in DC, Virginia area. Then in 2007, I turned into an angel investor, started doing angel investments. End of 2008, where I listened to my inner calling of my Mera Bharat Mahan and traveled back to India to oversee an investment venture which I had invested. And 2012 is when I started or I joined as a co-founder and a CEO of Get Domestic Help, which was a marketplace to connect the blue-collar workforce in India, primarily working in the your elderly care space, your housekeeping space. And that's how I got introduced to National Skill Development Corporation, right? NSDC, which is a prime body in India, which oversees everything and anything related to skill initiatives in India. It is a memorandum of understanding, a joint venture to say between the Ministry of Finance and a couple other ministries and few private bodies. So in fact, it was one of the TiE events which I had hosted at that time in my capacity as the president-elect for TiE Hyderabad, which got me to then CEO of NSDC. And the then CEO of NSDC saw my background, resume, and then he said, you have a hospitality venture going on, you are an IT person, you are an angel investor. Why don't you partner with NSDC and see if you can skill about 50,000 people in next 10 years? So that particular idea, that particular seed in my mind, that particular inception, right, took shape, and it took me about a year. In 2013 is when I became the NSDC partner. We were the first funded partner by NSDC, purely focused on domestic worker segment, to train about 50,000 people in next 10 years, right? So that's how this entire business of skilling, reskilling, upskilling got started, Tariq.
I see, very interesting. I mean, big step to return, back to Mera Bharat, to be honest, I've lived abroad so many decades, and very few of my friends, they give up, they have established, like one closest friend, he went back to Ghana. Okay, he was
Right.
my lifelong friend. He lived in Europe, he lived in the USA, and then he said, done. And now he's engaged in Ghana politics and so on. And I said, are you mad? But he said, yeah, I'm mad, but he went back. So it takes a lot. But I think India, of course, has opened up so much over the last 2 decades. A lot of people have done that, and it's fantastic if you can do that. So we'll come back to your transition, because you yourself, positioned yourself and you started this. So this domestic workers thing, the segment and getting them to learn. So where did the name Volksy come from? What's that supposed to say?
So it's a very interesting, change of things, Tariq. I mean, so first, let me go back to your first comment. Yes, it took me up. I mean, I was in US for about 17 years, right? Close to 18. Then one day, just decided to come back to, primarily because to take over our investment, and that's a bit of a nerve-wracking, but okay. I mean, it had its ups and downs. But the first venture is get domestic help, right? I mean, which is what I thought. We got covered in BBC, we got covered in a Wharton School. We were trying to create the LinkedIn for blue collar workforce, especially focused on the domestic workers. But while we were going through this journey of creating this LinkedIn, I'm an idea guy, right? So I created one more venture called House Care, which was primarily focused on the service side of the houses. Then I created something called Provider, which was very similar to a company called Managed by Q in US, which later got acquired by WeWork, right? Again, into the small and medium enterprises. So I was looking for a holding company kind of a thing which could hold all these ventures. So one day, me and my son, we were driving together, and I don't recall. I mean, now he's 12 years, so I'm guessing at about 5 years ago, 4 years ago. So when he was about 8, I asked him, and he was a very creative kid. I mean, he is still a creative kid. I asked him, hey, what could be a good name for the company? And incidentally, we were driving in his mother's car, a Volkswagen, right? Then he said, Daddy, you know that Volkswagen is a people's car. All your company deals with people, human capital. Why don't you call Oxy, right? I mean, as a Folksy Technologies, which means a people technologies. So then I said, hey, that's a great name. In fact, my first logo was designed by my son. There you go, Tariq. I created a holding company to hold all my ventures together. So I started a venture builder studio. So Voxy Technologies is a venture builder studio to hold all my ventures in under one single wrap. So that's how the Oxy came into existence.
Very good. Interesting. It's the mind has to be creative to think differently, capture the opportunity. So a little drive with your son leads to something that is long lasting. Wow. So tell us a little bit about, I mean, you described, okay, it's driven by domestic health care, helping elderly and so on. So give us some sense of size and scale of your operation today.
So today, we are close to about 80 odd crore turnover. That I guess what rough give and take about 10 million US dollars, Tariq. But see, I do want all the listeners to take this with a grain of salt. And the reason I say that is we are turnover rich and cash poor. And the reason I say that is as a caution to anyone who is listening to would like to work with the government sectors, because anything to do within government in India, you got to be really, really careful, and you got to be very mindful how you manage your cash flows, right? Even though we are the heavy turnover, our account receivables are humongous, right? So that means we have to borrow money. We have to be very prudent on how we spend money. So the profitability can take a big hit when you are looking at that kind of numbers. So higher your turnover, higher your challenges with your cash flows, lower your profit margins. So you have to have all those components into picture. Correct. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's the size.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come back to this question of can you make money in this business or not? That's related to it. But in terms of your size and scale, so you mentioned the government a lot. So your client is not the individual family or person wanting to learn how to be an elder care worker. Your client is the government or a state government?
Well, I mean, see, in one way, yes, that is from the payment side of it, Tariq. But from the customer side of it, it is still the student who is eager to learn, who is eager to either upskill himself or herself or reskill himself or herself. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the student is happy, student is satisfied with the outcomes which we are giving them. But the payment is done by the government, right?
Okay.
So if I go with a typical entrepreneurial definition of the customer, then the government will become the customer. But if I again take a customer satisfaction point of view, then my customer is the student and the outcomes which we deliver to the students.
So you use the word student a bit liberally. You're not talking about high school or college students. You're talking about adults who maybe have not gone through traditional education and they want to become these workers of the type you're describing. Is that right?
Absolutely, Tariq. I mean, you will be surprised. My range or my plethora of students, right? I have a fifth grade dropout blue collar worker to an engineering student who is looking himself or herself to get a job, right? So it's a wide range, and the beauty of India is the diversity it offers, or the opportunities it offers to how you can train or upskill or reskill these kids.
Well, but then that presents you a challenge because you could be doing a little bit of everything or you focus on a few areas. Like that must involve quite a bit of analysis or gut feel, I guess, right?
No, I mean, Tariq, I think that's a great question. So just to give you a little bit of a scale, right? There are almost 700 job roles for which Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Skill Development has created what they call as a NOS, National Occupational Standards. And for each occupational standard, they have developed multiple qualification packs, which is called QPs, and which are again managed by about 38 sector skill councils, right? And each sector skill council has various industry partners, industry connects, training partners, assessment bodies. So India has done a phenomenal job into categorize all these things. Whereas lucky for me, I'm only concentrating about 5 different sector skill councils. And today, I think give and take, we would have trained in 40 different, 40 or 42 different job roles. But we are again trying to going forward. So probably January, February of next year, probably we will cut short into about 10 job roles or not more than that.
Well, fascinating that, the government and the state organizes things. I mean, it's a big country, so what can you do? You have to have all those organizations. But So if you're focusing on, 5, or you've done about 40, but you like to keep it to 5 or 10. So in each of those, you have to have the specialisms, you have to have the programs. Tell us more about, I'm 18 years old, I'm a dropout, I like to just play cricket all day, I don't really want to study anything. How are you going to teach me, and how many months of brain surgery are you going to do on me to get me that job?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, very interesting question, Tariq. Let me just give you a little bit of a perspective. As of date, I think we have done about 42 or 44,000 people trained. Both that includes new skilling, upskilling, and reskilling, right? These are the three broad areas in which we have done about 42, 44,000 numbers. But it has been a very interesting journey. So when in 2014, when we started this entire training program, so my team consisted of mobilization, counseling, right? Then your teaching staff, then assessment staff, internal assessment, not external, and then the placement department, which will help them with the placement, who will work with the prospective employers. So my mobilization team would go to these villages and would first conduct what we call as a marketing campaign. You imagine the drums, you imagine the good old style of announcements which go around the villages. And we would fix a particular date where we would do a chai pani meet. So it's actually come have a tea with us, right? Where we would serve some hot pakoras and hot tea to anyone who would come and attend our session of introduction of various job programs. Typically, we would see parents, uncles, and these kids who would want a free tea or a free pakora or free samosa, right? Whichever it might be that day, come and attend. And we would somehow, our counselors would get their information, we would counsel them and get them into our training centers. And then our training centers, where we would take the entire application form, we would get them into the training program. But what we had noticed, or I had noticed, that we used to have a lot of dropouts from the training program, maybe after 1 week or 10 days of this training program. So then we initiated another program where we would talk to the influencers, right? So the influencers are the kids' uncles, kids' close friends, kids' brothers. Then we also went another step. We said, hey, can we even do a bit of analysis whether this kid has any loan? This kid has a two-wheeler? What kind of a lifestyle this kid has, to see what kind of a job role does this kid fit into, right? And then we would counsel the kid's parents to say, hey, your kid has this kind of a lifestyle. We think that this kind of a lifestyle needs this kind of a revenue, and he would fit into this kind of a job role. But what we realized is that in spite of all this, there is a bit of a social element, right? So let us say we got a kid into a fiber optic training program, fiber optic technician training program, and a neighbor kid into a housekeeping staff, right? Training program. And let us say they both are in the same training center being offered these two different programs. The neighbor's kid would drop out soon than the other kid, because the neighbor's kid does not want this other kid to see him going through the housekeeping training, right? So there is a very societal challenges which we encountered, right? So then what we had to do is we have to operate different training centers for different training programs, which means that we are running into a utilization of the capacity of the training center problems. So then we said, okay, so this I'm giving you in a very time capsule, but you need to say that we did this from 2014 to 2017 to get to the level of efficiencies what we got to. In 2017, like middle of that is when we initiated a huge technological investment where we created an ERP, we created a lot of nuances into the program, which would mobilize students across the districts in Telangana to collate all kinds of people who would go into a program. We would bunch them into about 100 kids and then put them into a training center, because at 100 people capacity, a training center would make sense for us. Anything lower than that would not make a break even. So these are the kind of things which we did to increase the efficacy in the this thing. Now, going back to your question, how would we convince that 18-year-old kid? If Tariq was an 18-year-old kid, so now we talk to Tariq's grandfather, Tariq's uncle, Tariq's brother, Tariq's sister, to make sure to understand what Tariq is about and say, okay, does Tariq has the mental capacity to become a fiber optic technician? Does he have a mental capacity to become a housekeeping supervisor? Does he have a mental capacity to become a IT or ITS guy who could be a data entry operator? Or could he become a cafe coffee day, which is the Indian Starbucks barista, right? So this is how we have now started recommending or counseling what is the appropriate program for the 18-year-old Tariq. I hope I answered the question. I know it is a long answer, but that's how we got into it.
So a couple of things you partly answered. It's awful hard work. I mean, your customer acquisition cost, if I'm the customer, must be huge, because first you're trying to understand the motivation. Is the family dependent on me to cut the garden and pick the apples? And then, is my capability okay for becoming a shoemaker, or whatever examples you gave, right? So you're doing all of that. That's awful hard work. I mean, how can you make any money doing this?
Yeah, absolutely right, Tariq. And so, in fact, the most I don't want to use this word in a public forum, but I will go ahead and use the word. The stupidest policy which the government could have done it. It is a private-public partnership. It is a PPP initiative between a private body and the government. But the government stipulates that a private entity cannot take profits, right? So what does that mean, right? So you are encouraging a private player to create a different kind of a revenue structure, right? So that is one of the ill facets of in general, the educational sector, right? So we have created a private entity, we have created a society entity to create certain offshoring mechanism, certain ways to make money. But in general, the percentage of the revenues or the profitability which we make is about 18 to 19%, right? And yes, the student acquisition cost is quite high. For just to give and take, I spend about $80 per candidate, because this mobilization team has to go stay in the villages for a couple of days, talk to them. And unfortunately, when we started, we couldn't even use the social media campaigns to reach individual targets. But now there are some databases which are available for us where the kids are on Facebook primarily. And we have some databases where we are trying to reach out on WhatsApp. And hence we are trying to bring the acquisition cost of the student down. So now I guess going forward, we will be able to bring it further down. But otherwise, until now, my cost is about $80.
Okay, and just the last thing on this one, is it like a 12-week program? Like, just describe us one or two cases, how long it takes.
It is, so one particular scheme, we worked for about 3 months. That is 90-day education program, which is a 60-day classroom delivery. So that is about 240 hours, right? Then the other program which we work is a 6-month classroom delivery program, which is a 180, which is roughly about 540 hours of classroom teaching for the kids. So the 540 hours deals with the high-end, your computer science, kind of related programs. Whereas this 240 hours, the 3-month program is in general for from retail to domestic workers to fiber optic technician to your mobile repair. All these programs fall into that category.
So I'm going to shift. I think I get the sense of that. And to the attendees, if I've not asked certain questions and you have certain questions or some answer was not, please type it in the chat window. But and I'll pick those up. But in the meantime, let's move over to what I call, reskilling, if you like, in an American sense. Like, Murali, that corporate training, the budget in the USA for corporate training is $87 billion. That's how much companies spend annually on training. Now, this could be, they're implementing SAP, so there are SAP programs, or they could be doing, regular, you defined it nicely. There's a new skill, reskill, and upskill. So within companies, 87 billion is what's spent. So what is stopping you from focusing on the corporate market? Because it looks like there's a big demand for reskilling in the corporate market.
No, you are absolutely right, and it's a fantastic question, right? There is a big. I think they are in unicorn right now. Tariq, they're called Guild Education in USA, right? So their entire playbook, right, is to how to give the opportunities for the middle America's workforce through education, right? And they have done a fantastic model where they have gone to the universities, partnered with the universities, and created that certificate program to the employees. For example, for example, Walmart employee wants to upskill or reskill, right? But when it comes to India, that is a bit of a challenging model, because most of the corporates, most of the companies don't give education as a benefit, right? In US, a lot of corporates give education as a benefit, right? So those training dollars does get converted into a reskilling mechanism. It becomes very, very easy for an entrepreneur to create a model around it, right? But in India, where there is an opportunity for reskill, and in fact, there is a company out of Silicon Valley which has a India presence called Springboard. It is going after that reskilling opportunity, right? Where they are trying to see if someone is working in a Java or a Python and they want to become a data scientist or a data analyst, they can take those courses and go become that, right? But that money is coming through the individual rather than the corporate benefit program. So one of the reasons I stayed away from that is, one, B2B sales is a challenge, and trying to get the corporates subscribed to the program. And then if I were to do a B2C program, then I do need to raise a huge venture capital money or a private equity money, because again, marketing, branding efforts, these are all huge challenges, and there is a challenge with the differentiator. Now you have Udacity, you have Upgrad. There are so many such companies which are going towards that particular business model, Tariq.
I mean, I think, described certain differences between the corporate world in the USA and in India. And of course, capital available in the USA for companies is higher. And but leaving that aside, you see, there are, over the last 20, 30 years, the dynamics here, you look at it, outsourcing is a big thing. So jobs are going out. And then automation, factory automation. So you look at the industries and how they have changed, and either the job is in Vietnam and China and India, or the job is with a machine. So that is forcing multiple things. People lose their jobs, so the individuals have an incentive to reskill, and the corporations to not look completely bad, they have to offer opportunities for reskilling. So just looking at this trend, there's so much of it going on. Just, what was it? Tuesday, I think we had a talk from guys in Silicon Valley. And Vijay, what was the name of the person, the guy who had the Midas touch? He was talking on Tuesday. Vijay's on mute. So he was just giving an example that, for example, medical billing. Medical billing is such a labor-intensive job at the moment. Like a lot of companies are doing medical billing, and he's saying that in 5 and 10 years, that will be all done by machines, right? It's going to be much more automated and everything. So those people will lose their jobs. And he's saying, well, they know all about the costs of medicine and the different illnesses and what bills go. Retrain them. So there's a reskilling program. So what I'm saying is there's an opportunity. So here in the USA, if you look at the market, there are so many of these things come to help capture the dynamic of what's happening in the industry.
No, Tariq. I mean, you absolutely, you yourself hit it on the nail, and I think you have answered the question yourself. Is because US, if you look at the major investments going in across the world, I would say, in the education sector, is from the US edu investors. I mean, for example, I have an advisor who is from the University Ventures. Their portfolio alone has more than 25 companies in the reskilling space. And in fact, I know of a company started by a German immigrant in North Carolina who it's a funded company. I'm just trying to recollect the name, but I don't know. What they have done is they brought their native country's apprenticeship model to North Carolina. And for you, Vijay, and other listeners who have dialed in from US, you all know that North Carolina used to be the hub of furniture industry. And so because of the China exodus, quite a few people have lost their jobs. So this particular company came, implemented robots into their industry manufacturing sector, but they trained these guys either who have lost jobs or who are looking for jobs in the industrial automation, in the robotic process automation for the manufacturing sector, created the apprenticeship model, and now they're creating hundreds of jobs in North Carolina, right? So there is a huge opportunity. But if you were to look at the same model in India, Tariq, it's a difficult and a different model, because one, the availability of human capital is huge in India, right? If I lose a particular person, I could easily replace that particular person with someone a better quality or better equipped or better trained for the same cost. Two, the companies who are going to hire this talent, they always don't go. I mean, there are very few and far companies who have the quality and the foresight for the future, what's happening from the technology point of view, to hire a certain kind of a skill set or require the certifications. They just hire someone who comes off to them from a lower price point of view. I mean, so that incentive or creating that kind of a models in India is a bit challenging. And from the venture industry point of view also, the risk-taking capacity from the ventures in India is very little. And they also want to go after a cookie cutter approach. That means if one VC has invested in one type of a education venture, all the other VCs would like to follow that and invest in, rather than trying to see, hey, can I create a 50 crore business? Can I create a 100 crore business with a capital efficient model? And can I invest in that and get the returns which my LPs would expect out of me? And what can I do it, right? I mean, I'm going to reverse this question, right? Tariq, you lived in different countries. You lived in, you experimented with the different ventures. Now you are a venture partner for Elevate Capital, which is a impact investment for a large extent from a thesis point of view. What is your experience? I mean, forget about my experience. What is that you have seen? I mean, maybe you could share something. I mean, which I could bring it back to India and try to see if something can happen here. I mean, my experience has not been that. So,
I mean, that's, you've obliquely said it, like, see, the need to be creative and different. You see, that's something that, why should you follow all VCs and venture going this way? I think it takes a particular skill. If you're following the crowd and following the most important themes, then you have to be the biggest and the fastest, right? So today, in fact, COVID is there. So COVID presents so many opportunities, distance learning and so on. And we'll go into that. There's a question on that. But in my experience, I like to take it slow but deep, right? So I spent a lot of time in corporate life, and corporates today, every year they promise to become more efficient, better systems, better processes, but still there are big problems, right? So I see an opportunity there, help corporates work more efficiently, and it comes down to teams working together, collaboration, and team building. So now, if I were to crystallize that idea and turn it into an opportunity, I would have to be 120% engaged in that. Like, this is the business of launching a startup, right? You have to really put a lot of hard work, get the right people, and be smart about being quick about it, and so on. So I think the opportunity is there for sure. And you know, you mentioned differences between USA and in India. I think India is not too different. Like, if you come up with uniqueness and different opportunities, it's worthwhile doing. I mean, I don't know if I'm rambling or if I'm answering your specific question. There was something you wanted to get to the bottom of.
yeah, no, I'm just trying to see, Tariq. I mean, see, as a venture partner, you have certain risk-taking capacity within the thesis of your fund. But when it comes to Indian venture partners or Indian VCs, I think that risk-taking capacity is a little different. And for example, let me come back to the company which I am operating right now, which the government is a customer. With the signed MOUs with the government, and you know that it's kind of guaranteed to get money, but there is no structure or a instrument with which I can either go to a financial institution, either I can go to the bank, or I can convince a venture partner saying that, hey, there is a decent amount of return, and can you fund my operations? No, that hasn't happened, and it won't happen because of the taboo of working with the government schemes. Whereas in US, I don't think you working with the government is such a taboo. And in fact, I know so many workforce development boards of respective states in US are encouraging the private venture capitalists to back the entrepreneurs who are creating these workforce readiness programs.
Look, I remember in June, one of our speakers was Gopal Jain of Gaja Capital. You might remember.
Yeah.
And one of the comments he made was that the Indian private education sector is the most exciting and interesting sector for venture capital and for entrepreneurs, right? And we went into some detail why it is and so on. Now, in talking to you, what I'm finding is that you're not sufficiently plugged in to the private sector, right? You're kind of I'm not saying you're doing a social service, but you're getting government money and help people get jobs and so forth. But if you were to, for example, monitor the individuals. So you told me, okay, they get their job, they do their 3 months, 6 months, and then you can show that out of the 42,000 people we did, we 24,000 got jobs and this is what they're doing, then there is interest in that from the private individual themselves, right? And somehow I'm seeing it's missing, right? Like you're not able to capture the private interest and you're stuck in the government side.
I love you for such a great question, Tariq. Really, it is a fantastic, there's a lot of depth in that question. And let me answer that, right? In this 42, we have our job placement rate is about 83%, right? We have done a decent job in monitoring and creating those things. In India, right, especially, let me address this question in two different ways. From a blue collar workforce point of view, there are two job roles where a private kid or a student would pay for it. And one is the hospitality sector. There is a 10-month diploma course where the kid is willing to pay about 75,000. And I'm giving you average fee structure, 75,000 rupees. And there is a 3-year degree program in hospitality sector where the kid is willing to pay about 2 to 2.5 lakhs, right? The other one is the hospitality sector.
Healthcare, healthcare.
Not the health, but the wellness, right? Where the kids are willing to pay amount and get into the beauty and wellness. So where they want to be a cosmetic person, the makeup person or a masseuse, they pay these fees and they would like to join these training programs, right? But when it comes to other training programs, right? For example, a domestic worker training program, or a fiber optic technician program, right? Or your mobile repair training program, these kids don't want to pay, right? And you are stuck between, which training program. And I'm going to again challenge you to some extent that please show me a education company which is into training the hospitality sector students who got funded by the private equity or VCs, right? It is a self-funded mechanism which we have created a great amount of cash flows for themselves, right? But not for from a enterprise building aspect of it. Even though they have given good certifications, they have given a certifications where they could get jobs in the companies like Taj, ITC, Oberoi, or whatever you call it. But they have not gone on to scale, right? Now, when Gopal Jain was talking about the Indian education sector, he is very, very promising. I was there, I attended that session, but what I gathered is pretty much in the K-12 space and to some extent in the degree education space, but not in the skilling, upskilling, and the reskilling space. So that's how I would like to answer your question.
Okay, well, let's connect this to one of the questions that came in. Shrikant is asking, post-pandemic, how do you see skill training change?
Well, so again, it is from a private sector point of view, the skilling has changed. We have implemented a lot of technology. We have LMS, we have Google Classrooms, we have gone to digital. Our teachers started doing through their own mobile smartphones to a large extent. But surprisingly, Tariq, because of the various government schemes and the way the policies have written before COVID, during the entire COVID, government did not allow us to use technology as a medium to train these kids. So until September 21st, all our training centers were shut close, right? I do see that post-COVID, the skilling and the reskilling business will change with the usage of technology, but this will only happen in the private lifestyle kind of a businesses.
Okay, just moving on then. Satya Narayana is asking, what are the major roadblocks for startups in reskilling industry? What is your suggestion to overcome those roadblocks?
So if it is a government sector where government pays for the students who would like to be reskilled, your major roadblock is working with the government, your proposal process, your answering to the RFP, working with the NSDC, and it will take about probably anywhere from 6 to 9 months to get your paperwork in place. But from a private sector point of view, your customer acquisition is going to be challenged, and your roadblock or the way to conquer that is the content and content and content, right? So if you have a superior content, if you have the superior mechanism to deliver the content, and if you have a superior teacher faculty to teach that content, you have overcome that roadblock to a large extent. But still, going to the target customer, acquiring that customer in an efficient manner, and providing them jobs, or helping them or assisting them in getting a better job after the reskilling program is how I would, if I were to overcome these roadblocks. That's how I would look at it.
Yeah, come up with something new and different and better, without a doubt.
Not so much new, but definitely better. So, I mean, you could still teach Java, but can you teach the Java in a better and efficient manner so that the kid who is working as a data entry operator can get himself reskilled to be a better Java programmer in the 3-month period. So the only way you could come up better is giving him the better content, and by getting them trained by the working.
We screen freeze.
Yeah. Yes. I'm just trying to reach out to him.
Okay.
Meanwhile. So, but seems to be a interesting area.
Yeah,
So hi, Murali, we got you. Yeah.
Yeah, we lost you for a minute.
Yeah, I realized. I thought I was okay, and I thought it was on the other side, but it looks like it was on my side. So no, I was just saying that a Java programmer, a guy who's a data entry operator could become a Java programmer, and then if the training company can assist him getting a Java. So most of the trainers in today's training ecosystem in India, Tariq, are the people who couldn't find jobs in these companies, and hence that has been the challenge.
Okay. So one of your, you said not necessarily new, but better. And on your website, I did go to Voxy, and there was an interesting line. You have in there, empower educators to create learning experiences. You see, now in several of the talks we've had in the last 3-4 months, a lot of people are saying experiential education as opposed to rote learning, right, is much more effective. So, and you also have that on your website, right? Like you make an effort so the educators give experience, right? So
absolutely.
So that's, for me, that's something new, right? That's an innovation as opposed to just doing something better.
It is definitely innovation, and the way we are empowering the educators to create that experiences is through technology, right? So I'll give you one small example, Tariq. I mean, I'll take a blue collar example and a white collar example. In the blue collar, fiber optic technician is one of the job roles which we train, where we train with where we train for a job role with one of the cable operators who bring fiber connectivity to the homes, right? So one of the ways which we create an experiential learning is by the guys who are working on the field to train the students who are taking these lessons or these training programs, right? So they are demonstrating a live example when they go into a customer home, and what are the challenges they encounter, and how do these students are expected to solve them and do it. And the second way we are empowering these educators is we are teaming these students with the educator to be on them on the on the road as part of their project learning, right? So that's one blue collar example. On the white collar, we are taking the tech leads, we are taking the project managers who have the real life experience to teach these kids a Java programming or a PHP programming or a Python, REST APIs, and that's how we are getting them into the empowering the educators with the help of technology to get to that. So I hope I kind of answered that question for you.
Yeah. Okay, let me go back to the list. Yeah, somebody's mentioning that in India, this is Paul Siddiqui, reskilling is the domain of, the big companies, Deloitte and KPMG, not new startups. That's for corporates, and I can understand that. How do we learn more about this program and certification? Okay, somebody wants to connect with me. That's nice. I'll do that. PM Modi said India should focus more on skills than certificate. How does that help?
So everyone these days are trying to educate the employers to concentrate on the skills and not worry about the certificates. Like, don't worry about the engineering degree. Don't worry about a bachelor's in commerce. Don't worry about whatever the degrees these guys will bring to the table. But is this guy good at reading a cash flow statement? Is this guy good at creating a balance sheet? Can the training institutes, can the vocational training institutes like me create specific skill sets to teach the kids in a piecemeal manner so that the employers will hire them for those specific jobs? So that is what Prime Minister Modi has been advocating. Say less credence to the degrees which these kids carry, but pay more importance to the skills they carry to do a particular job.
So, for example, I think it's a balance, right? You can't ignore, and you can call it different names. Okay, is it certificate? Is it qualifications? You call it what you like. But if you look at Germany, the apprenticeship model in Germany, for whether it's pipe fitting, plumbing, electricity, or anything, they have a very, very organized method for the number of hours they have to do and the skills they have to take. And there's a firm way to prove that the person has done the learning, right? So it cannot just be all empirical. You have to have some certification behind it or something equivalent to that.
Yeah. So certification is different from the degree programs, right? So the way the certification programs are working in India. So in fact, Tariq, I do want to, while I did bash a little bit the government, but I must congratulate Government of India on one thing, right? What Government of India did was it looked at South African skilling model. It looked at the Australian skilling model. It looked at the Germany skilling model. Germany's apprenticeship model they took at the vocational and professional education which happens in Australia. They looked at the skill development which happens in South Africa. Beautiful. And got all of those three things together, right? And combined and put together a beautiful skilling ecosystem in India. And that's where you see the national occupation standards, that's where you see qualification packs. There's also, you see the apprenticeship model, right? So the on-hand training program of the apprenticeship model is, there is a scheme called NAPS, National Apprenticeship Program Scheme, right? Where the Government of India incentivizes the employer for about 1,000 rupees or 1,500 rupees, something like that. But you do have to understand, given the cheap labor market, given the lesser importance on the skills which these kids bring to the table by the employers, those schemes or those programs are not getting enough emphasis, right? Whereas in US, right, when I used to take my Honda for a service, I used to see a certificate or a certification called ASC, right? And the guy, the employer, is to proudly display all my technicians are ASC certified in Virginia. That I don't see in India, right? Unless the employers feel, okay, certificate is very, very important, and these guys bring that skills to my table. It's a chicken and egg kind of a problem, right, Tariq? So, but otherwise, what Prime Minister is saying that don't worry about your 3-year bachelor degree program. Can you bring the skills to the table, and do you have the certificate to prove that skills, and let the employers hire you for that particular job role?
Okay, that's a process. Let's see how it unfolds. Here's some more questions. How much customer acquisition cost is getting impacted to bring back people who left cities during COVID? Bring back people who left cities.
Could you repeat that, Tariq?
Sriram, do you want to take the questions from now? I think there's some detail there that you could illustrate.
Yes, thanks, Tariq. Thanks for passing on. So, Murli, the quick question here is like, there have been massive exodus happening in the cities in India, people going from cities back to the villages happening there. So don't you think that is going to impact for you now to tell people a lot on the CAC to convince them more even that before to come back to cities and get trained and take jobs in the cities? Because if you skill them, they can't get jobs in the villages.
Yeah, so Sriram, it's a double-edged sword, right? Unfortunately, this exodus has created, but now, after so many months into the COVID, you do see people coming back to the cities for the jobs, especially in the construction sector, one of the largest sectors where it had impacted. And you do see quite a few initiatives by the government of India to train these people locally to see if these people could be accommodated in the various kind of jobs in the local areas. But unfortunate reality in India is the development is centered in the urban centers. Even the tier 2, tier 3, you don't see that kind of a development, you don't see that kind of industrialization. So there is the entire lack of opportunities from the job perspective for the students, right? So even if I were to go to the interiors of Jharkhand and train them, I have to bring them back to either Delhi, Jaipur, Bangalore, Hyderabad, or any of these places to get them employed, right? So there is a lot of efforts going on, but unfortunate reality is the economic condition of the country itself is that economic conditions prevail more in the urban centers than in the suburban or the rural areas. So that's the long but the short answer.
Okay. And Murli, there is one more question that I would like to know. You've been a very courageous man, I must say, working with the government, waiting for the pace to come, and then still working on their cause because you want that people, everybody should get their share of the bread and they should have a lovely life by, and getting the new skills. But have you ever tried, to teach back to the government, asking them about, how about the dichotomy? At one place, they say that, that everybody needs to have certain kind of qualifications. If you see government jobs, they'll say this many years of experience, this qualification, probably from this university and whatnot. And you see that, that the PhDs, they apply for a job of a peon for a government job. So did you ever give a try to the government saying that, hey, why don't you yourself break the dichotomy and ask skill-based jobs so that, no PhDs apply for this kind of positions of as low as a peon?
So Sriram, don't put me in trouble than the trouble in which I am already with the ecosystem players. Yes, I am a courageous man, but not so courageous to tell the government what they should do, and especially in the current circumstances where I have crores of rupees of account receivables pending with the government. Let me get my money back. and then I will listen. No. But in all seriousness, Sriram, see, government works with the multiple ecosystem players, right? There is on one hand the Ministry of Labor, which wants to create employment. On one hand, you have Ministry of Finance, which wants the revenue, right? On one hand, you have Department of Personnel, who looks at the quality of people who gets into these government jobs, right? So it's very, very difficult for a one particular department in the government to convince the other departments to go along and say, hey, now let us create a skill-based employment system within the government. It is not going to happen. Maybe within that particular department, under one particular officer, there could be an experiment, and I think that experimentation happening. I'm not going to say it is not happening. So I'll give you one example, right? Today, there are almost about 30 or 35 different government bodies which does different type of skilling programs or training programs, right? It has been a mammoth task for the government to bring all those skills under Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. We have MSDE, but to bring under one umbrella has been a Herculean task. So far, government has succeeded in bringing the ITIs and some entrepreneurship programs and the NSDC under the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. So now imagine if the government has to go and advocate skill-based programs. I think it is a challenge, and we have to recognize that, and that is the reality, and we have to move on.
Yeah.
And we as entrepreneurs, Shira, and I think it is us who need to take that bold step, and it is us, we should say, hey, I don't care whether you have graduated from BITS or IIT, but if you have a great data analytical skills and you can show to me, you can prove to me that you have skills, I will hire you as a data scientist. I'll hire you as a data analyst.
No, I completely agree to that point. Rather, the main difference which has happened, means I worked for many dog years in Germany, and I saw that, the people, those who are working there, but school graduates or just passed some levels of school, but great at programming. And we see that, even if you see probably points for you because you work in public-private domain. So, that especially in the companies like Facebook, it happens like, people are first taken they are asked to take Strength Finder or, stand out as an exam to identify what their personas are or what their strengths are. And then using Drucker's theory that, that you should skill or you should improve the skill where you're already at the best, so that, you become better than anybody else in that area. Probably that could be some points that you can think of, that before you skill people, you identify what are their skills and then take them to the next level, or train people to think about that as an
no, Sriram, in fact, one of the assessments which we do both pre and post determines the skills which the current kids who we take possess, and how we are trying to improve. In fact, it goes back to one of the Tariq's question: do you guys do any impact studies or to see if we have really made a difference in life, right? So Sriram, I just do want to go back a little bit. I'll tell you the two people who were motivational or inspirational for me to even get into the skilling, right? One, my first company, my director for IT and infrastructure engineering is a high school dropout by name David Brower, right? So if he could become the director in US for a pretty decent company, why can't we provide similar opportunities for people? So it is one as from a skill-based training. Second, there was a lady who, when I was born, I was a very fat kid, apparently. So my parents had hired this lady to take care of me, right? For up to 5 or 8 years old when I was, right? But when I saw my own personal journey, I had, gone to a distance, but why couldn't that lady have a career path? Why couldn't she move this thing, right? So my entire reason to get into the domestic worker was because of that particular lady, and thousands of such stories in India. right? So I am very, very particular, very, very keen on the skill-based training programs. And I think this upskilling, reskilling, or new skilling, whether it's a blue collar, gray collar, white collar, it is going to revolutionize in India, but I think it's going to take at least another 8 to 10 years is how I would look at it.
Wonderful. So I guess we have already reached the time, and before we go up to the next, the furthermore thing, I would just like to share with everybody that hey, we in this series that we have been doing, it's been like more than a dime of sessions that we had, and we had great people like Murli and others, legends coming in to talk about what happens in the education industry. And the next two sessions which are lined up is one is on the 3rd of December. Please mark your calendars. 3rd of December, we have Mr. Harish Mamtani to come in and to talk about. He's coming with his own panel when he is managing quite a lot of, he's invested in quite a lot of schools across India. And he is going to talk about what it really takes to run a school business in India, what it demands and how things have changed, especially in this era. And on 17th of December, we are getting in Mr. Yaqub Patani, Dr. Yaqub Patani, wherein I'm going to be in conversation with him to understand, what exactly is robotics and how the future of technology is going to be, especially how it impacts the education business. So this is what our two sessions which are going to be. I'll request you all to mark your calendars, and so that you can take benefit from these sessions. And before we close, I would really like to thank Murli for taking up time. It was really a pleasure hearing you. The session has really opened the minds and encouraged some of them for sure to think about the skilling. And especially I would now look for people, those who have skills. People should get a fair chance. People who are coming from small cities but have caliber, they should get chance. So you opened my eye. I shall say now for certain jobs that if you have got capabilities, please do apply. Degrees always do not matter. And I would think that many other people would also do the same. And very promising session. You gave us quite a lot of insights about how it works, and keep doing the good work, especially wherein you're still awaiting. 10 million is not a small amount of money, wherein you're still waiting that account receivables to come. But we really learned about all three types of skilling, new, up, and re. And looking forward for you to come again with some other sessions to talk about more. And so once again, thanks Murli for your time. Tariq, thanks for hosting this entire session. You were brilliant with the questions, which really inspired people to hear about more things. And thanks TiE SIG. Thanks Vijay for hosting this entire session and scheduling the session for us. Thanks TiE Global. Thanks everybody. You were a great audience today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah, bye.